Hakadosh Boker Or Masechet Gittin Daf 8a. The Gemara is now talking about that we wanted to make a differentiation. We wanted to make a connection between a atzitz, right, which is nakuv, an atzitz that has a hole, which is going to be on top of pegs. So imagine it's in the middle of the air and is getting disturgement from the ground. So we wanted to make a machloket, the same machloket between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda to do with the boat. We wanted to apply it here, and then we answered that you can't say that because in both cases I could push it off. Whether it's according to Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yehuda was the one that said over there, he says only by a boat because a boat can move, but these things cannot move. Or even according to the rabbis that say you're always going to be chayav, you're only going to be chayav by water because the water is going to be what? Is like ground, and therefore there's no pasek, there's no ifsek between the ground and the sfina and the boat. However, here there's a ifsek, so there's a ifsek, maybe you're not going to be chayav. So says the Gemara, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Amar, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak comes and he says, okay, we're a few lines down, we're 2, 4, 5 lines down. Okay, so he says like this. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak comes and he says, Binarot Eretz Yisrael, in the rivers of Eretz Yisrael, Dechule Alma lo plige, nobody's arguing. Ela ki plige, when is a machloket between them? Bayama Gadol, Yama Tichon. Meaning, if it's going to be the actual rivers in Israel, everybody says, right, that has nothing to do with the ground. What do I care now whether the boat is nourishing from the ground, not nourishing from the ground? At the end of the day, if you're talking about the rivers in Eretz Yisrael, there's nothing what to talk about. It's Israel. So when is a machloket between them? He says by Yama Gadol and Yama Tichon, which is basically when you have, right, in the Yama Gadol, that it's going to be a big machloket. The Tanya we learned in the Braita. Ezu Eretz, right? Vezu Chutz Aretz. What is considered Eretz Yisrael on the northern part, and what is considered Chutz Aretz? So Kol Shofea V'Yored Miturei Amnon V'Lifnim Eretz Yisrael. Anything which is going down, right, from Turei Amnon, which is Horahar, right, and on the inside of Israel, which is the means on the south, that's going to be considered Eretz Yisrael. V'Miturei Amnon V'Lachutz, and anything which is going to be towards the north, which is going to be on the other side, is going to be Chutz Aretz. So he comes out of the Piskat Ahar, right? That means that's the Gvul. And therefore, from the south, it's going to be part of Eretz Yisrael, and from the north, it's going to be Chutz Aretz. Okay? So now, the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to say, until where does it go to? Hanisin Shebayam. So now, what happens now when you have these different islands, which are in the middle of Yam HaTichon, right? So, on the left of Israel, you have, Sicily, you have a whole bunch of different islands over there. Right? Even Jerba, by the way, is an island, yeah? So he comes and he says like this, you have all these nisin shebayam, ro'in otan kilu chut matuach alehem, right? Miturei Amnon ad nachal Mitzrayim. So you're going to look as if there's an imaginary line. And you're going to take this imaginary line, which is going to be going from the west of Turei Amnon, right? The Horahar, okay? So you're going the west until Nachal Mitzrayim. You have the picture there on the bottom. You see the picture on the bottom? You have Turei Amnon, so now you're going as if like you're making an imaginary line to the west, and then until Nachal Mitzrayim, which is on the bottom. Okay? So Nachal Mitzrayim, Minachut V'Lifnim, anything which is inside, right, is going to be considered Eretz Yisrael. Minachut V'Lachutz, but if it's going to be on the other side, so then it's going to be considered Chutz Aretz. So this is one shita over here. Rabbi Yehuda argues, and he says, Kol shekeneged Eretz Yisrael, anything which is parallel to Israel, Harei Keretz, it's like Israel. Shneimar Ugvul Yam, which means when it says ugvul yam, the word ugvul was extra. So why does it say that? To teach you that anything which is going to be parallel to Israel is going to be considered, right? That means even the rochav hayam itself is going to be considered tchumei Eretz Yisrael. However, though, when you're going to have the different islands which are going to be towards the south and the west, which are not mula mamash, right, which are not parallel to it exactly, right? So the person has to see, right? We're going to look at as if say from Kufluria. Kufluria is another city which is on top of the Horahar, right? On the northern part of Israel, until the Yam HaKionus, until the end of the world. And from Nachal Mitzrayim, Vad Yam HaKionus, until Yam HaKionus. Minachut V'Lifnim. Right, so now there you have it. By the way, did you see the next picture? The next picture you have it, Kafluraya, right? And then you have Nachal Mitzrayim. Okay? So you're going all the way to the left. Okay? The Turei Amnon was only just going, right, according to Tanakama, just the first part. Everyone has the pictures. Yes. So says the Rabbanan, and according to the rabbis, right? He comes and he says, "Hay ugvul mayavdile." Right? What do you do with the word ugvul? Because obviously, what are they going to be learning? The Tanakama, what does he learn with ugvul? If you're going to tell me now, like the next shita, it was going all the way to the left. You were just going left field. You were just continuing going. So he says, "We need it for we needed to add in those how do you call them, the islands, right, which are going to be right on the towards the inside." Rabbi Yehuda, according to Shtat Rabbi Yehuda, you don't even need a pasuk for those islands whatsoever. Okay, fine. Next, two dots. Rabbi Meir says Akko is like Eretz Yisrael to do with the Gittin. So Rabbi Bar Abba comes and he asks the following question: Hamocher avdo leSuria. Imagine right now you come and you sell your slave from Eretz Yisrael to Syria. So it's komocher b'chutz haaretz dami or lo? Is it considered that you're selling it like as if that you sold it to chutz haaretz, which means that he goes to cherut, or not? Which means that you're not allowed to sell your slave to somebody in chutz haaretz, because then your slave is not the same kedusha, so therefore he goes out free. So if you're selling your slave to Syria, is that ki'ilu considered right that you're selling it to chutz haaretz or not? So he comes and he tells him, we already learned it. Rabbi Meir says, Akko keretz Yisrael legitin lo. You see that only Akko is to do with Eretz Yisrael towards Gittin, but only to do with the Gittin, but not to do with Avadim. And therefore, if an Eved is going to be sold to there, right, that's what we're saying. If right now you're going to tell me that Be'emet, Akko is not part of Israel, if you're going to sell it, it's going to be a problem. Only to do with Eretz to Gittin, it's like Eretz Yisrael, but not to do with anything else. So V'cholshke and Surya, all the more so Surya then, the Menachah Ketuva, that's going to be much further away than Akko. If you're going to tell me that Akko only has a din to do with the Gittin, that means only to do with respect to Gittin doesn't have a din of Eretz Yisrael, but everything else no. So Kal V'chomer then to do with Avadim, it's going to get out free. So Kal V'chomer Surya, which is much further out. So Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in the Braita, B'shushat Derachim, right? Shavta Surya l'Eretz Yisrael, U'shlosha l'chutz haaretz. There are three different aspects that Syria is the same like to Israel, and three different aspects that is going to be the same as chutz haaretz. What is the siman? Ab bar rak. Yeah, Ain bet, bet resh, resh kuf. Okay, each one of them is actually a letter. Like afrat tameh is a ain, bet is a mocher avdo. You know, bet again is the hamevi get, right? Resh maaser, right? And then you have the thing on the bottom there. So number one, afrat tameh. What does that mean? The afar is going to be tameh, just like chutz haaretz. Okay, so therefore the Surya, it's going to be the afar is going to be tameh, just like in chutz haaretz. It's also that they made a gezerah on tumat amim. Bet hamocher avdo leSurya, hamocher bechutz haaretz. If you sell your slave to Surya, it's like selling it in chutz haaretz. So therefore, obviously, he goes immediately free. Gimel hamevi get mi Surya can be chutz haaretz. If you bring a get from Surya, it's like coming from chutz haaretz as well. So those are the three different halachot that made Syria equal to chutz haaretz. Now we have three which are going to be equal to Israel. It's going to be chayav in maaser and shvi'it, just like Israel. Number two, if somebody wants to come into tahor, he could come and stay tahor, right? But not by other eretz amim. Okay, we're going to explain this on Amud Bet. And if you're going to purchase a field in Syria, chet Amud Bet. It's like you're buying it in the kfarim and the sadot around Yerushalayim, which means it's like you're buying karka in Eretz Yisrael. That means even though it's Syria, right, it's like Kilu, it's considered Eretz Yisrael. Now we're going to explain one by one. Says the Gemara, why would you tell me now that if you're going to be in Syria, right, all of a sudden now you're going to be chayav in Maaser and Shvi'it like in Eretz Yisrael? Why? So says the Gemara, he holds, he holds that since David Elmaleh came and he conquered Syria, so therefore he comes and he says, so then that's considered, even though it's considered a kibush yachid, it's considered a kibush, which means even though he's an individual that he came and he conquered Syria, it's considered a good conquering, and therefore it belongs to us. So therefore it's got the din of Eretz Yisrael. Okay? The next halacha, if somebody wants to go into it with ta'ara, he could go in and it doesn't become tameh. It's a stira. You told me 2 seconds ago in the things which it's not like Israel, you told me that afar is tameh. Afar tameh means that the ground is tameh, which means it's got tumat amim. 2 seconds later, in the positive that you're saying that it's like Israel, you just told me that you could go in and it's your tahor. How does that make sense? It's contradiction, right? So he comes and he says, "Beshida tova migdal." He says, no. you went in the Shedat Tova Migdal. There's a difference between the ground and the airspace. The ground is tameh, but if you go in a box or a caravan or all these things, Shedat Tova Migdal, in these things, it's not going to be the afarat tameh, but you have the airspace which is tahor. So if you could actually go in with the airspace, and it's going to be tahor, right, in the airspace. So that's why it's not a contradiction. Because if not, then how do you get in there? No, we're talking about you're going in a box. So if you're going in a box, you don't have the problem of afar tameh, but you do have but you have the good part, which is that the avid is not metameh.
Doesn't matter if the box is in the cover tomorrow.
We learned in the Braita, if you're going to go into the land of the Amim, the Shidat Tova Migdal, Rabbi says you're going to be metamer. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda says you're going to be metaher. He says you're going to be tahor. Fafiru Rabbi, and even Rabbi lo kam metamer la beretz Amim. He says that it's only going to be metamer because they made a gzera on the gush and on the avim. Aval Syria, but on Syria, al gusha gazru al avila lo gazru. They only made a gzera on the gush on the ground, but not on the avim. Okay, that's what we're saying until now. Next, hakoneh sadeh beSuria kekoneh beparvei Yerushalayim. He comes and he says like this. He says, right, if somebody's going to acquire a field in Syria, so it's like buying it in the kfarim around Yerushalayim. The ma'ilchata, what is the nafkamina between them? Lomar, to tell you, shekodim alav ono v'afilu b'Shabbat. You're allowed to write a shtar mechira, and even on Shabbat, which means that we know, right, that if you're going to buy a piece of land from a goy, right, obviously you're not allowed to write on Shabbat, but can you get a goy to write for you this document on Shabbat or not? So if you're buying a piece of land in Israel, right, in Yerushalayim, you're allowed to write that document even on Shabbat. Not you, you're getting a goy to write it for you.
You're asking the goy to go?
Yes, you're asking the goy to come and to write it. Okay, so therefore he says, and even on Shabbat. So that's explanation that Syria is going to be the same halacha that you're allowed to do that. That means you're allowed to come, and even on Shabbat, you're allowed to tell a goy, listen, write to me this document that he's selling me the field. So says Elmaleh, but Shabbat, you really think on Shabbat you're writing a document? Shabbat's like a daitach. And says Elmaleh, no, kedamarav like Rava. No, you're telling the goy to write it for you, and that's exactly what we're talking about also. You're telling the goy and telling it to you. Now, even though you're not allowed to tell a goy to do something on Shabbat, it's called shvut. You're not allowed to come and tell a goy to do an isur for you on Shabbat. It's called shvut. Yeah, he says because the Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, the rabbis did not make this decree, and they permitted you to make this document on a Shabbat. Okay.
Why? You couldn't find another day to do it.
Yeah. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in the Braita. Eved shevi gito. If you have a slave that he brings his get shichrur, remember in liberation papers. So he brought his own get, right? We had a get shichrur. Right? V'katubo, and it's written there, Atzmecha unchasai kunin lecha. You and my properties are acquired to you. Atzmo kana, nechasim lo kana. So he only acquires himself, but not the properties. Okay, because basically, b'fanai netam b'fanai nechtam does not help him to be mekayem the shtar to do kinyan. It's only going to help him to be mekayem the shtar to do his shichrur, but not to do with anything else. Okay, so says the Gemara, ibailehu. So we're going to ask the following question: Kol nechasai kenuyin lecha. All my properties are going to be acquired to you. Mahu, what's halacha? Meaning, right? This is also the nusach, which is of the shtar, which is raui, to actually come and to free him, but it's all one. It's all together. Meaning here he's saying, Kol nechasai kunyun lecha. All my properties are acquired to you. By him doing that, automatically he's freeing him. So now, what's halacha now? Because here, beforehand, it was like, you could say it's two different shtarot. It's like, you're going to be acquired to yourself, and all my properties are acquired to you. Here, he's saying, everything is acquired, all my properties are acquired to you, which means in the same language, I'm doing 2 for 1. So now what are we doing here? Do we split it up? And we say, no, only to do with his liberation is he believed, and everything else no, or not? So Amar Abaye says, Mitoch shekana atzmo kana nechasim. Says Abaye, from the fact that he acquires himself, he's going to acquire the properties as well. Because here, since everything was done in one shot, so it's like a migu, because it's like something that the fact that he's believed on himself, he's believed on everything else as well. Because it's all in one sentence, one utterance. It's all one thing that which was done. Amale Rava argues though on Abaye, and he says, Bishlama atzmo likneh. I understand he's going to acquire himself just like a get of a woman. A woman could bring her own get and she's going to be believed and she's going to be divorced. 1 second. But to do with the everything else, he comes and he says it doesn't make sense. Why? Because he comes and he says you have the kiyum shtarot. When you want to come and you want to do kiyum shtarot, what are kiyum shtarot? He comes and he says, right? He comes and he says, when you're doing kiyum shtarot, you have to verify the signatures of a document, and then you could come and you could use this document for something good or not. Question is, what's happening over here? Meaning, I understand you want to believe in to do with himself. It's like a get. A woman could bring her own get, and she's going to be believed. She says the farid of a dam, no problem. She's believed. But now here, right? This is kiyum shtarot. Kiyum shtarot has nothing to do with her, right? It's a regular halachot of kiyum shtarot. So Hadam Abaye. So Abaye says you're right. Since he doesn't acquire the nechasim, he doesn't acquire himself. Everyone understood what happened? One more time. The person comes and he writes to a slave, Kol nechasai kruim lecha. All my properties are acquired to you. Yeah? Abaye came at the beginning, he said, it's like a migu kazeh. It's like a 2-for-1. The fact that he's believed on himself, he's believed on the properties as well. Ask Rava, I don't understand you. Believed on himself, he should be believed. Why? Just like a get of a woman. But to be believed on the properties, it's kiyum shtarot dalma. So Abaye says, you know what, you're right. Let's retract. The exact opposite. Since he's not believed on the properties, he's not believed on himself. So ask the Gemara, Rava says this again as well. I understand nechasim you're not going to acquire, but it's like kiyum shtarot dalma. But al atzmo, he should acquire. He need to have a get, right? Isha, just like get Isha. Rava, but rather Rava comes and he says, doesn't matter whether we're talking about in both cases, whether you said or kol nechasai kurim lecha, atzmo kana, nechasim lo kana. He's only going to acquire himself, but not the properties. So Amale Rava the Bar Matana le Rava says Rava Matana to Rava Keman. Who does this go like exactly? Like Rabbi Shimon. The Amar Palgina Dibura. So according to we go Shitat Rabbi Shimon, we split up the testimonies. It's like we're splitting it up to two different concepts. The Tanavas we learned in the Mishnah. Hakotev kol nechasav leavdo yatsa ben chorin. Right? If right now a person comes and he writes all his properties to a slave, the guy comes and he's going to become free, right? And then he's going to acquire everything else. Shiyer karka kolshu, but if he left a little piece of land, lo yatsa ben chorin. He does not be yotzei ben chorin. Right? And therefore, he doesn't want to acquire him anything. Right? It's kilu that he wants to save for himself. So therefore, the kavanah is that he wants to save for himself also the eved. And lashon kol nechasai is just basically everything else, which is basically going except for the eved. So Rabbi Shimon comes and he says, leolam hu ben chorim. Really, be'emet, he is always going to be a free person. Ad shiomar, until he says kol nechasai netunin leploni avdi chutz me'echad meribo shebahen. Unless he's going to say that everything is going to be given to my servant except for echad meribo shebahen. And even there, the shaveh eved yoter mishiur hashiur, right? That means even that the eved is going to be worth more than whatever he left over. For example, chutz me'echad meribo from the chasav, and the eved is worth more than that. Nevertheless, still we're going to say that kavanah is so the eved, which he's not going to be machshiv oto kim l'dvar muat, which means he's only being machshiv as slave, only like a small amount. So therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon, he says that the concept of palgin and dibura means that we're splitting up whatever he's saying. He's saying two different concepts. We're splitting it up. So this has to be going according to Shitat Rabbi Shimon, that we do this, that we come and we split up the testimonies to do two different things, that all of a sudden it's going to be good. And Bezat Hashem, we continue tomorrow.